In the wake of the Chernobyl accident, a sarcophagus was built to contain the reactor to prevent further spread of radionuclides. This was done within 3 months of the accident. By 1997, it was showing signs of decay, and plans were made to not only repair the sarcophagus, but to build a new structure called the New Safe Confinement. This is to cover the existing sarcophagus, to prevent further deterioration from weather, and to prevent the aerial spread of nuclides in case of the collapse of the sarcophagus. Work is also being done to disassemble other reactors in the area. The workers on this project are local, and we're going to look at the process they go through to work there in the exclusion zone. After applying to work and being called back, the workers come to the RCRM to be examined. First, in-depth interviews are conducted regarding previous work. This is done to determine what sort of external doses they've received. This depends not only on the location of their work, but what they were doing specifically at that work. After this, they are measured to determine what sort of internal radiation dose they have received. Internal radiation dose comes from radionuclides from within the body. For those who have not worked in highly contaminated areas, a simple measurement is performed. The same process is done for children who live in any of the contaminated zones, or children of the liquidators who perform the initial cleanup after the explosion. For those workers who have had previous work experience in the exclusion zone, a more in-depth scan is required. First, they're required to move their clothes down to their underwear, and they're scanned to make sure that there are no radioactive particles on their skin or hair. This would give them an unusually high reading, and it could also possibly contaminate the detector. After this is done, they enter the whole body counter. The walls of the whole body counter are steel from ships that were in use at the beginning of the nuclear race. There's a small bed inside, and inside of that there are 6 sodium iodide crystal detectors. Also, there's a phosphate detector which is placed over the patient's lungs. Normally there are 2 phosphate detectors, one for each lung, but the other is currently being repaired. If needed, there's also a detector that's placed on the forehead to measure the amount of radiation dose coming from the bones. The detectors are simply taking an energy spectrum. Generally, they will detect potassium and cesium. Occasionally, a worker who has been in the exclusion zone a lot will also have cobalt in the lungs. From the spectrum, we can tell approximately how much cesium they have in their body and can approximate their internal dose. The printout, which shows the general layout of the radionuclides within the body, shows the amount of cesium and the amount of potassium throughout the body. This can be used to determine how the cesium entered the body. If it is distributed the same as the potassium, then it was eaten. If the cesium is primarily located over the thorax, then it was inhaled. Next, the workers are given a lecture and given the measurement tools they'll need to take biosamples. First, they're instructed in what they can expect in terms of radiation dose. There are 3 main ways that internal radiation dose is received. That's through eating things that are contaminated with radionuclides, from inhaling radionuclides, and from absorption through the skin. Absorption through the skin is not likely, and they haven't ever found any concrete evidence that that's happened. Eating it is the next most likely if they're not careful in where they buy their food while living there. They are told that if they want to continue to work there, they need to make sure they buy their food from actual stores and not from people on the side of the road, which is the cheaper way and the more common way here in Ukraine. That's their best bet for keeping their internal radiation dose as low as possible. Also, inhaling it is always a danger for them working in the construction with dust being blown up, and so it's recommended that they wear little face masks to limit the amount of internal radiation dose which is received through inhalation. The workers are given what they will need to take their biosamples. They are given a list of identification stickers which they are to place on each sample as they submit it. The main biosample that they're to take is a Q-tip in a little plastic baggie. Each day after they finish work, they're to wash their hands first, take out the Q-tip, wipe it around in each nostril and place it back within the baggie, place their identification sticker on it, and submit it to the main radiation health worker. They're required to wash their hands first because this prevents any contamination of radionuclides which would be on their hands from ending up in the bag. That's the most common way that they get false positives. When that occurs, if they do get a reading that's too high, that worker is required to come to Kiev for 3 days of examination. Usually they find nothing, and they determine that he just did not wash his hands before submitting the biosample. So they are urged over and over again to make sure that they do that. Not only that, but twice a month they're required to give a stool and urine sample, which are both just put in a plastic bag in the toilet as shown here. And those are submitted as well for sampling analysis to determine the amount of radiation dose. This is a serious deal because if this is not completed correctly, then they are not allowed to work within the exclusion zone at all. Even if they pass all the other health tests and show everything else is good, if they do not submit these samples as often as is required, they are no longer allowed to work there. I interviewed personally multiple workers who were applying to work within the exclusion zone. None of them were willing to speak on camera, even with their faces blurred. But they were willing to talk to me off camera and said that it was fine if I used this information. I asked them if the pay was significantly different, if that's why they were deciding to work within the exclusion zone. And they told me that supposedly the government tells the people who are giving the funding that they're paying the workers approximately €9 an hour to work on the construction there. They said in reality it's just like any other job in Ukraine. You do your few months worth of work, and then when it's done they give you $300 and you're done. You go home. And I was somewhat surprised. I asked them if the pay here was any different than elsewhere in Ukraine, if that's why people wanted to work here. They said no. In fact, there were places within the city of Kiev working on construction there where you could make more money than here. It's just that work is so hard to find that people are willing to go ahead and receive the same amount of pay, even in significantly worse work conditions. And then I also asked them, in regards to the questionnaire of where they had worked and how long, if any of them ever lied. And they said, yeah, that happens quite a bit because people want to be able to work there as long as they can. And if they get too high of a dose, then they're not allowed to work anymore. So oftentimes people will lie about where they had worked previously. So this is a big problem that needs to somehow be addressed within Ukraine.